Hello friends, Clage back to another Punishing Grey Raven guide today, and we are going to be talking about the original Devil Hunter himself, Dante. Dante arrives in PGR as our newest S-rank fire attacker, but much like his brother Vergil, the main focus of Dante's kit will be on his Ignition Elemental effect. Dante shares quite a few similarities in his kit with his brother while still being completely unique and freeform with his playstyle. So those of you excited to show off your stylish combos and ideas with the man who literally gave us a style meter in action games, you're not going to be disappointed. Overall, Dante's a bit more simpler and straightforward than Vergil, in my opinion, but he still has all the fun and stylish options you would expect from his own game series. Many of the points I brought up during Vergil's guide are going to apply to Dante as well. The fact that this is a collab, the fact that you should assume this is our only shot to get these characters and their equipment, and just referencing things that I mentioned in Vergil's guide about the combat kits, the similarities the two have, and all that stuff. Because of that, I definitely recommend watching the Vergil guide as well, mostly because I'm going to be real with y'all. I don't have another 2-hour guide in me right after Evo. I really do not want to make another feature-length film, so I do think that Dante and the Ignition effect itself are a little bit simpler to understand and explain and go over how to maximize those. So I'm hoping this is going to be a little bit more expedient of a guide. I'm still going to go over the entirety of Dante's kit, every single move, every single option, how they all flow together so that you can better understand the character from the ground up and be able to work on whatever your goal is with Dante. If your goal is to dominate the leaderboards in Warzone and Pain Cage, I'm going to show you how to do all the nerdy little optimizations and how we get there with the rotations. But if you are a new player, you just want to be able to style and understand the entirety of Dante's kit within Punishing Grey Raven, I've got you covered. We will go over all of that in the combat explanation. So I'm going to try and keep this quick. I'm going to try and be expedient this time because, again, I don't want another feature-length film, and I'm pretty sure y'all don't either. So we'll go over the stuff you'd expect: evolutions, memory builds, weapon options, his cub, and, of course, his new team composition. So without further ado, let's get started and get in there with the evolutions. So at S5, using Dante's ultimate, his charge yellow orb, or using his hold basic attack with his devil sword or Balrog equip while having full devil arm energy will trigger all QTEs. This is slightly different from the norm because it's not just the ultimate that triggers QTEs, it's multiple parts of his core kit, but for the most part you're still going to be utilizing this passive when you're casting ultimates. At double S, after casting his ultimate while in Sin Devil Trigger form and then exiting the field, Dante will launch attacks every 2 seconds, dealing fire damage. This works basically identical to Vergil's double S passive, where he leaves the field and then does attacks every 2 seconds. In addition, the base damage of holding any of Dante's colored orbs while he is in Sin Devil Trigger mode will increase that damage by 120%. At triple S3, which is a notable point in evolution for all of you, because if you pull a single copy of Dante from the gacha and get your freebie by doing that, you also will get one free copy for completing Chapter 6 of the event story. This means that if you pull a single copy from the gacha, your Dante is guaranteed to be double S3. So this actually matters to basically all of you who pulled at least a single copy. But after casting his ultimate in Sin Devil Trigger form, Dante's QTE will deal 1000% extra damage for the rest of the battle. This is identical to what Vergil does. The base damage of Dante's equipment and his hold basics while equipping the Devil Sword or Balrog will all increase by 100%. So notable upgrades there. And again, if you pull one copy from the gacha, you're there. You are already at double S3. At triple S, while in the departed state, while Dante is launching attacks from off-field, his extra damage increases by 100%. Basically a long-winded way to say his off-field attacks, once you switch him off, now deal 100% extra damage. The base damage of his Sin Devil Trigger ultimates increase by 1.7 times, and by 2.1 times if Dante has an ignition mark, since ignition is a core part of his kit and what he will be specializing in. That is a notable bump. Is interesting that they decided to do 2.1 times as the listing. We almost always just get pure percentages in PGR, so I'm not sure why they chose to word it that way. Just kind of an interesting thing I noticed. At triple S 3, 6, and plus, the damage of all Dante's equipments, his holding basic attack with the Devil Sword and the Balrog will increase by another 70%. The extra damage on his hold orb attacks while he is in Sin Devil Trigger mode increased by 60%, and the damage of activating Sin Devil Trigger itself will increase by 40%. So there's your evolutions all the way up to the maximum. As for memory builds, Dante's main memory build will work for the vast majority of the content you intend to take him into, and that's going to be 4-piece Shakespeare and 4-piece Coddy harmonized with his 6-star weapon. If you do not have the 6-star weapon, you will just do 2-piece Coddy. Remember to put Coddy on the bottom row with this particular memory set, as Coddy has a higher attack stat on the bottom row, and that's what counts for the bonuses. Excuse me. This build works for both fire and ignition war zones and basically will be your everyday driver. As for resonances on his main build, for the lower resonance, you're going to want to do signature move, and on the upper resonance, any attack plus 15 will work fine. Dante does have one alternate setup, which will be used for Phantom Pain Cage ignition bosses. To do that, what we are going to do is we are going to swap over to a 2-piece of Vergil. This is Nanami's signature set, but as you can see, it increases ignition damage by 5%. That's really the only reason we are equipping it. And with this set, we are going to swap our harmonization over, and we are going to go over... Wrong button, me. We are going to go over... Take off Coddy, and we will put on Elizabeth for the fire boost. So essentially, we're keeping Shakespeare, putting on the increased fire damage from Elizabeth, the increased ignition damage from Vergil, and what this is going to do is it will make it so you will not be able to ultimate as many times in succession because we won't get the built-up extra signature energy from the Coddy set, but this will make his ultimates do more burst damage, which is ideal if you're doing Pain Cage. We want to get the bosses dropped as soon as possible, so that'll be the route for this. This is definitely a niche set. You do not need to build this right this second. We don't have any ignition weak bosses yet in the Pain Cage, but we will eventually. So just keep that in mind and have that ready down the road. You'll use the same resonances for both sets, signature on the bottom, 15 attack up top. And then hypertuning, as always, you'll want to hypertune the bottom row first for the attack bonus and the top row second for the other bonuses. So pretty straightforward on the memory builds. If you just want to build the Shakespeare Coddy and call it good, you'll be set to go for quite some time. As for Dante's weapons, Dante is not out and out locked out of his stuff with using the 5-star weapon. You can still do basic rotations. You're just going to have to build up a lot more of his resources manually by using more basic attacks and stuff like that. But if you are on a budget, you cannot afford to pull the signature weapon right now, you can do the entire kit, do all the styling, and show off really cool stuff even with the 5-star weapon. With the 6-star weapon, obviously, we get a massive amount of bonuses. Just the bonuses he gets from equipping the weapon. This weapon specializes in converting a lot of Dante's various core passive resources into one another. This just kind of happens organically with the way we play the character. Getting a 10% attack increase is obviously big business. That's a lot of extra damage. And this just makes his rotations much smoother and much more efficient to go in and out of when we're working either with fire damage or ignition damage. Of course, the big bonus with the 6-star weapon is the ability to harmonize and resonate. For this reason alone, I highly, highly recommend getting the 6-star weapon. And just like I talked about in Vergil's video, assume this is your only shot to get his 6-star weapon. You're not going to be able to kick the can down the road and go after it later. I definitely recommend getting it now if you can at all afford it, because we are on a limited time schedule here to get all this stuff for the Devil May Cry collab. As for weapon resonances, if you do the 6-star, prioritize deadline timing. This just smooths over the rotations, makes things a lot easier for Dante. You don't have to spend time building orbs with basic attacks. After that, prioritize damage style resonances. Glorious Afterglow is what I think should be your second priority, and then after that you can swap between Incandescence and Matrix Lightning depending on what makes the most sense for the content you're working on. So again, if you're on a budget, feel free to use the 5-star weapon. It will work. You'll still be able to style on things just fine, but highly recommended that you go get his 6-star weapon if you can at all afford it. As for the Cub, Dante's Cub is more traditional than Vergil's. It acts much more like you would expect a PGR Cub to, work within the confines of the battlefield. So Dante, unlike Vergil, does not have a special skill he can activate without having his Cub equipped. Vergil obviously can do the tiny summon swords whenever he wants, regardless of whether or not he has his Cub equipped. Dante does not get that luxury. If you want to do the stuff with Cavalier, if you want to have the motorcycle skills and show off with the bike in your combos, you will have to roll Cavalier and have it equipped. But just like all Cubs, it comes with some pretty notable bonuses. The increased fire damage and ignition damage is especially nice, and the active skill, the passive skill that you get by just doing your normal rotations and stuff. Cavalier will boost damage quite a bit. In addition, the active skill for Cavalier does group the enemies. That's always quite nice, especially in war zones with multiple enemies around. Grouping is always worth its weight in gold in there. So this is a solid Cub. It gives pretty notable damage bonuses with the main skill, and then obviously just 10% on top for your elements is always nice. If you can afford the Cub, definitely recommend getting it now because, again, you're not going to get a second chance at it. So if you intend to have Dante with his full kit, I definitely recommend picking this up while you can. But that covers all of the equipment. With that, let's go over the new team compositions you will have with Dante available. So run over the trial zone here real quick. So, Dante's main team, of course, is going to be the Ignition team. For the Ignition team, we are going to have Dante as the leader on red using the main memory set I pointed out in the memory builds section. Vera will be our support, running her standard support memory set, 4-piece Da Vinci, 2-piece Einstein, and 2-piece Guinevere with her harmonization. If you do not have harmonization, I would prioritize Guinevere over Einstein, but you can mix and match. They're not that different from one another. Just make sure you have Da Vinci on no matter what for the QTE bonuses. And then the tank will be Nanami on the yellow. For her memory set for doing Ignition, we are going to swap off of 4-piece Heisen because we will not need lightning damage since we're focused on the Ignition part of her kit. So we'll swap over to a 4-piece Kadi build for her and have 2 pieces equipped, and then use our weapon harmonization to get the full Kadi bonus. So this will increase her overall ignition damage because her signature set, Herschel, innately does that, which is very, very nice. And you do not need to change your resonances for Nanami when you have her set up. Signature on the bottom, 15 attack up top. And, of course, same for Vera. You don't need to change any of her resonances. If you are running her as the support, you will just have the amplifier class skill on the bottom and 15 attack up top. So that is the Ignition team. There are no real substitutions at this point. If you do not have Nanami, you can substitute in Bridget if you've decided to build Bridget from when we got her for free or during the earlier part of the global sync. She is not going to be notably as effective as Nanami is, not even close. But if you want to do Ignition content and you do not have access to Nana Knight yet, you can use Bridget as a budget alternative. The other team Dante can file into will be the Fire team. If you do not have Lucia Pyro Oath in any format, you haven't pulled her yet, you're a newer player starting with Devil May Cry, then Dante can slot into the Fire team. I will say that, at least in my testing, Dante is much closer to being on par with his main element than Vergil is with his. Dante can do solid fire damage, and if your Dante is much higher invested than, say, your Lucia Pyro Oath, he may actually be the better fire damage option for your team. If you have Dante, let's say, all the way up to Triple S and beyond with his signature weapon, with his Cub and everything set up, and you only have Pyro Oath at, let's say, like double S with her 5-star weapon because you're a new player, you haven't got her fully built yet, I would do some testing. There's a good chance Dante might actually outperform her at that point. But if they are anywhere equally invested, then Pyro Oath is still going to be the better option for your fire attacker. If you only have Dante, you don't have Pyro Oath at all, but your Vera is fairly heavily invested, then I would suggest swapping Vera over to an attacker set using a combination of 4-piece Shakespeare and her 4-piece signature set, Hervor. I don't have this set built because my Vera is never going to be anything but a support, but that is an option if your Vera is well built. If she's at triple S with her weapon, she can outperform Dante in fire damage. Watanabe, just go ahead and keep as your tank. You're going to go ahead and use his Shakespeare Alphonse setup. You can use the same setup you use for the fire team normally. But Dante can do fire damage just fine. He's not terribly ineffective at it. But again, if you have a built Pyro Oath, you're never going to run Dante unless you just want to run him for the fun of it and the style. So keep that in mind when you are building your fire team going forward. As for pull and recommendations, same thing I said with Vergil. This is Devil May Cry. This is the biggest patch in this game's history. It is a hallmark moment for this game, but it is just that. It's a moment. Dante will be gone when this collab ends. If you have any intention of building him, you need to do it now. You need to get stuff pulled now while you can. As I mentioned earlier, for investment recommendations, if you pull one copy of Dante from the gacha, you're already at double S3. That is a great starting point. Dante functions very, very nicely from there. If you're willing to pull 2 copies, then you will get Dante to triple S just like that, with no other help whatsoever, because you get your 2 copies from the gacha, the 2 free copies from the gacha for pulling him twice, and then your 1 free copy for completing chapter 6 of the event story. So at triple S, Dante is going to work quite well and be very, very effective on the Ignition team. And again, if you don't have a well-built Pyro Oath, he can slot in to take the fire team attacker role just fine as well. But once again, get this stuff done now. If you want Dante at a certain level, if you're intending to go all in, get him to triple S plus and beyond, all that good stuff, make sure you roll on everything while you have time. And once again, I would prioritize his weapon after you get that first copy, get him to double S3. After that, it's going to depend on what your goal is with Dante. If you just want a style, if you want to have the full moveset unlocked, I would recommend the Cub after you get the 6-star weapon. If you are just planning to optimize your Dante for Warzone and Pain Cage stuff, then it's a toss-up between the Cub and then going to triple S and beyond. So ideally, if you're intending to really maximize, you're probably going to get both, but that's the route I would go for the investment recommendations. So that covers everything for the builds, the teams, all that good stuff. Now we can once again get into the meat of this guide, and that's going to be the combat demonstration. I'm going to try and make this one a little bit more expedient and a little bit more concise while still showing you every single facet of Dante's kit, because I know you all want to know how to style with this man. So let's go hop into training mode and get started on the combat. Okay, just like with Vergil's guide, I will be going over every single move and facet of Dante's kit throughout the combat demonstration, showing you how they work, how they interact with one another, so you can start building your own cool combo routes and figuring out how you best want to style on opponents with our favorite Devil Hunter. Of course, I'll also talk on any meta-relevant skills when we get to those in the various demonstrations, talk about how they'll apply to his rotations and how we maximize scores in Warzone, Pain Cage, all that fun stuff. But we always got to start with the basics, so let's go over Dante's basic attacks and his movement options to get going. So, unlike Vergil, Dante only has 2 sets of basic attacks. Not all 3 of his weapons have unique basic attacks, so we'll start with the base weapon, Devil Sword Dante, which I'm just going to call Devil Sword for the rest of the guide because I think it's very confusing for me to say his name at the end of the weapon while also saying his name to tell you I'm playing Dante, you know what I mean? So I'm just going to abbreviate with Devil Sword going forward. But this, like the Yamato for Vergil, is his main equipment. He will always come onto the field with the Devil Sword equipped, and the basic attack string is a flurry of slashes into the million stab with one final stab that throws the enemy away. So basic attack string for the main weapon, the Devil Sword. The Balrog has a basic attack string that you can chain infinitely. This just goes on forever until you cancel into another skill or do whatever you want with it. But if you want to just chain the sword punches with the gauntlets, you can do this ad infinitum. So 2 different basic attack strings. The hat, Dr. Faust, does not have a basic attack string. I'll go over that when we go over all the orbs and stuff. So a little bit of a difference for Dante there, that he does not have multiple basic attack strings for every single weapon. So something to keep in mind there. Just like Vergil, Dante has a dedicated jump button. So if we hit that, Dante will go airborne. Unlike Vergil, Dante actually does have a double jump. That was a mistake in my Vergil guide. I thought neither brother did. Shows what I get for not researching both of them first, but bear with me. If we do another jump in midair, if I don't hold it, Dante will in fact double jump, which opens up options for different movement and all that good stuff. And then if you are midair and hold the jump button, Dante will teleport down to the targeted enemy. So pretty straightforward with the jump. They act almost exactly the same as they do with Vergil, although with different moves depending on what your equipment is. Dante can also charge the jump button to do his rising upper with his Devil Sword. Do note that even if you have the Balrog equipped, this attack stays the same. So you will always do the rising uppercut with the Devil Sword regardless of what weapon you have equipped. However, it will not change your equipment back to the Devil Sword. So if you do this charged attack and you want to continue using the Devil Sword, but you were on one of the other armaments, make sure you go ahead and swap back by tapping the orb. Equipping the orbs works exactly the same as it does with Vergil, where if you tap the orb once, you equip that weapon. There is a very important different caveat with the yellow orb, and we'll get to that when we talk about each orb individually. But just know this works the same way. You can swap equipment at will. You can swap equipment even during time stop, and this does not interrupt any currently going on animation. So if I start the Devil Sword string and then swap to Balrog in the middle and then swap back, whatever animation I'm doing will play out, and then Dante will automatically swap to the other weapon. So pretty straightforward there. Next, Dante has a very unique dodge for a couple reasons. If you tap dodge while at neutral, Dante will go into his Royal Guard stance. I'll go over Royal Guard in detail a little bit later, but just know this slowly drains the guard meter, or the guard, I guess it technically is a guard meter, slowly drains the dodge gauge while you hold it, and then once you run out of dodge gauge, Dante will exit the Royal Guard stance. So just something to keep in mind if you're trying to do a normal dodge to go through an attack or proc matrix, make sure you are holding a direction, because if you don't, you will get the Royal Guard stance. If you do a dodge while running and just tap it, you get your standard PGR dodge. Dante's is kind of notable, however, because unlike a lot of PGR characters, Dante can chain his dodge indefinitely until he runs out of meter. Most PGR characters usually can chain 2, maybe 3 dodges together before they'll have a forced animation cooldown where you can't chain another one. So this is kind of a special, unique thing Dante gets that allows him extra mobility and repositioning on the field. This can be useful to go chase down an enemy in Warzone if they get away from you and run off to Narnia and whatnot. So this makes perfect sense because this is to emulate his trickster style. That's the whole purpose of Dante's dodge. So I like that they added that in and made it so you can chain them indefinitely. I'm a big fan of that. In addition, Dante does have dodge in the air, so if we go ahead and jump, you can chain air dodges the exact same way. This is also notable just because when Dante is airborne, the dodge gauge recovers 3 times as fast. So you can chain these for a very long time. If you want to move around, if you want to go air dash heavy and style on your opponents in midair, you have a lot of ways to reposition. You have a lot of ways to utilize your dodge meter, and you can chain quite a few of them together as I showed you. So pretty important stuff to have. Dante's dodge is quite good. Again, being able to chain these is quite nice, especially for dodging big boss attacks or AoEs, but Royal Guard is also really fun to have. It's one of the coolest mechanics from the Devil May Cry games, and we'll go over it in detail a little bit. So that goes over the basics of movement and Dante's basic attacks. Let's talk about his orbs at base level now. So just like Vergil, Dante has 3 colored orbs and his white rose orbs. These are the same as Vergil's Devil Soul orbs. These are consumed when using various skills to enhance them and help build up his core passive gauges, as well as build some signature energy. Certain skills will use more than others or can be held down to continuously consume the white rose orbs to enhance them. So this works fairly similar to how Vergil does. As mentioned, the red orb is his Devil Sword. Tapping it when it is not already equipped will swap to it. This does not cost any resources, just like Vergil's does not. So you can swap between these two whenever you want, and it will not impact anything, won't cost you any resources to do so. The second orb, the Balrog orb, is, of course, the fist weapon for Dante. This is going to be very, very common if you are playing for the meta, because this is the weapon that helps Dante get his ignition mark and swap over to ignition damage. So you will be getting very familiar with this equipment as we go through more of his skills and rotations. And then lastly, the yellow orb is Dr. Faust, the hat from Devil May Cry. This is different from our other two equipment orbs because tapping this orb will automatically use the skill. Now, this is notable for a couple reasons. One, using the Dr. Faust skill and calling down the meteors there will automatically proc both Matrix and QTEs if they are on cooldown. So you do want to be a little careful with how you utilize the Dr. Faust orb. You don't want to accidentally equip this and end up burning your Matrix proc or calling your QTEs when you don't want to. This does not consume any White Rose orbs if you equip it. So if I tap this, you'll see we don't go down from 16 on our White Rose orbs. What will start using them is if you hold the button when you swap over to it, because this will charge the meteor skill and cause a different form of the attack to rain down from there. So whenever you use the Dr. Faust orb, do note that whatever of your two main equipments you are on will stay equipped. So if I am on Balrog and I tap the Dr. Faust orb, I am still on Balrog. If I am on the Devil Sword and tap Dr. Faust, I am still on the Devil Sword. So something to keep in mind when you are using this orb. The Dr. Faust orb is mostly used as a rotation ender, but I will go into all the details of all the attacks it has available once we do that section. But just note that it does not work the same as equipping the two main devil arms. This actually does proc a skill when you hit it, and because it procs Matrix and the QTEs, you're going to want to be careful and be somewhat particular about how you time that while you're trying to do your stylish combos and all that fun stuff. Dante does have an extra static orb. That is his firearms. So you can hold this down and Dante will fire whatever firearm he has equipped. For the Devil Sword, he will use Ebony and Ivory. This can be held down. You do not have to mash this to fire. Dante can also fire Ebony and Ivory from the air. In the air, if you are willing to mash it, you can actually stay airborne for quite a long time. So this is a way to extend some combos, keep your style going if you're trying to show off a really long combo exhibition. When you swap to the Balrog, you will get the shotgun instead of the Ebony and Ivory, and just like that, you can hold down the orb to continuously fire and move however you want. The shotgun does have a unique aspect to it. However, if you are holding a direction and you tap the orb, Dante will do a modified stinger with the shotgun. So this will propel him to the enemy. He'll fire a shot and knock them back. This can be canceled into other animations just like everything else. So this is another notable movement option you have available when you have the Balrog equipped. This effectively means Dante has access to some form of stinger to close the gap, no matter which of his two weapons he is using. It's just that stinger will be on the actual firearms when you're using Balrog, while it is a main skill of the Devil Sword itself. So now we've gone over those. We've gone over the White Rose orbs. We'll talk about when those are consumed when we get to the actual skills. The last part of things we need to talk about here is we need to talk about Dante's core passives. So let me reset to neutral here. So, Dante has 3 core passive gauge. The D off to the left here represents his Devil Trigger gauge. The weapon itself, much like Vergil's, changes based on the shape of what equipment you have equipped. Even the hat has its own gauge that you can work with. So this will change depending on what you have equipped at any given time. But this is his Devil Arms gauge. Using skills that consume the White Rose orbs and various other things will fill the Devil Arms gauge. The Devil Trigger gauge can be filled basically by doing anything. Even doing basic attacks will slowly build up the Devil Trigger gauge, as you can see down here, whereas using skills that ping the White Rose orbs will build both the Devil Trigger gauge and the Devil Arms gauge, respectively. Basically, how these two gauges works is you build them up, and once you have either of these full, whether it is the Devil Trigger gauge or the Devil Arms gauge, this will enhance some of Dante's other attacks. When using these enhanced attacks, Dante will consume his own gauges, both the Devil Trigger and the devil arms to create judgment points. Just like Vergil had his numbered stack that buffs his ultimates, Dante has exactly the same thing. So since we have both a full devil trigger gauge and a full devil arms gauge, if I hold basic attack, you will see a lot of the gauges are completely consumed, and they are converted into judgment point stacks. This number maxes out at 1,000. That is the most judgment points you can ever have. So once you are built up on judgment point stacks, when you are in Sin Devil Trigger mode, if you use one of Dante's full ultimates where he goes into his ultimate while in Devil Trigger mode, he will consume the judgment stacks, and the more stacks you have, the more damage the ultimate does. So pretty straightforward core passive. At the end of the day, it just kind of works itself. You utilize skills and various orb pings to build up the gauges. You can also do it with the basic attacks. The gauges fill up, and then they are converted into the judgment points to boost your ultimates. Do note that the Devil Trigger gauge dumps a lot more judgment point than the actual Devil Arms gauge, but in general, they're both going to fill up at the same time by using the skills that you use. So it's going to basically come around the same point, and they'll kind of add up together to specific numbers, and we'll go over the details of what numbers you need to hit once we get to the rotations. But the general rule of thumb is build up the gauges, use specialized skills such as the hold basic attack with either of your main weapons, convert the gauges into judgment points. Judgment points get expelled when we do our ultimate and increase the overall damage of that. So that goes over all of the basics of Dante's core kit, including his core passives. I do want to touch a little bit more on Royal Guard and one other thing real quick, but to do that, we're going to go ahead and actually go activate a dummy that isn't static, because Royal Guard's not very fun if we're not actually being attacked. So let's go ahead and go into regular combat training here. And I will go ahead and bring Dante in. So, as mentioned, holding dodge will put you in Royal Guard stance. When you release the stance, Dante will do an attack and punish the enemy. So if you hold Royal Guard, you will just block whatever is incoming. As long as you have dodge gauge left over, you will be able to stay in the Royal Guard stance and more or less lower damage by a notable amount. But the fun part of Royal Guard is, of course, parrying your opponent. So if you release at just the right time, right before an enemy would hit you, Dante will do the dash attack, and then we'll go through the enemy. This is fairly tight timing. I wouldn't say it's unreal to hit. It's definitely not the perfect judgment cut that Vergil has. Come on, buddy. I put you here to attack me. Work with me here. There we go. So if you release it right before you get hit, you do the enhanced attack. This is going to be very useful for those of you looking to style and show off the Royal Guard aspect of the kit for Dante. It's very fun to use. Royal Guard, I love parry mechanics. A lot of people love parry mechanics, and this is just as satisfying to play with as you would normally expect. Dante does have one hidden ability, and that is clicking on the core passive gauge. If you click on the core passive gauge while moving, Dante will summon his spiral swords to home in on the enemy. If you do this while at neutral, they will flare out and go upwards and launch the enemy if they are within range. Dante also does have a taunt. It is a little bit more awkward to hit, but if you go in the air and tap the core passive gauge, or... oh, it's hold. My bad. That's why. If you hold the core passive gauge by clicking on it, or use your skip story button, Dante will throw the rose at his enemy for, you know, style points, nothing else. It actually does not do damage as far as I can tell. So even if you hit with it, it doesn't seem to do any damage. However, it will juggle the enemy if you hit them from range or hit, yeah, see, just like that. You get a little juggle on top of it. So just like Vergil, Dante does have hidden moves with the core passive gauge or using your skip story button. So I just wanted to go over those real quick before we start getting into the meat of things. But for now, let's go ahead and get back to regular mode and go over the various equipments and skills Dante has to build up those gauges. Okay, so let's start going over the move sets for Dante's main equipments here. We're going to start with the Devil Sword. As mentioned, the Devil Sword is Dante's default equipment. It's what he'll always come equipped with when he comes onto the field. the double sword is his primary way of doing fire damage. So this is going to be the main weapon you evolve around while building up your fire rotation and all that good stuff. So that is kind of the easiest way to think of the double sword. The main equipment orbs, so both double sword and Balrog, have combo orbs. So very similar to like Ishmael and Selena and characters who, if you ping their colored orb and then ping it again after, you get a different attack. Dante has the same thing. So let's start going over his actual double sword skills. So if we just ping the red orb once with the double sword already equipped, we will get the stinger. So classic Devil May Cry attack, gap closer, very, very good skill, all around easy to use. This is going to consume up to 3 of the white rose orbs as long as he has them available. And if it pings 3 white rose orbs when you cast Stinger, you're going to get half of your Devil Trigger gauge and half of your Devil Arms gauged full. So you can basically think of these 2 gauges as being broken up into sixths. For every white orb that is pinged when you use a skill, you're going to get that much of the bar filled. So since we have enough orbs to do 3 pings, this is going to fill halfway every time we use a skill. So if I do another Stinger here, you'll see now we have a full gauge and we're completely set up. I should also note that Stinger is also Dante's bring-in attack, so I'll show you that real quick. Just like with Vergil, Dante's bring-in attack will trigger the attack, but it will not consume any orbs, and thus it will not build any of his core passive gauge. So unlike a lot of normal PGR characters where your bring-in attack will actually give you all the benefits of if you had done a real 3-ping, Dante and Vergil do not get that luxury. So just something to keep in mind that you're going to need to do at least 2 different pings that ping 3 orbs to fully fill your gauges. So we talked about Stinger. So if we do back-to-back red pings, what will happen is we will go from Stinger into the Million Stab. So Dante does the Million Stab and then does the one giant thrust, knocks the enemy away. And you will see, since we did 2 back-to-back red orb pings, each of them consuming 3 of the rose orbs, we now have a full Devil Trigger gauge and a full Devil Arms gauge. So this is your easiest way to get the gauges built up, is just to utilize the orb combos. So when you come on screen, if you are trying to get through rotations quickly, if you're trying to output damage the most efficiently for fire, not for ignition, you're going to just want to do 2, 3 red pings. So we just do Stinger into the Million Stab. Bam, we've got a full gauge. Now, there are a couple unique things about the Million Stab. You can, if you want, keep pinging the red orbs, and Dante will keep Million Stabbing until he runs out of rose orbs. This is not like Vergil's Million Stab in his Devil Trigger form, where it will just consume 1 orb the longer you hold the Million Stab. For Dante, every single ping is going to continue using the maximum number of white rose orbs you have. So if you keep pinging Million Stab, you're going to eat all your white orbs very, very, very quickly. You can do this for styling and all that, but in terms of using it for actual efficiency in rotations and Warzone and stuff, we obviously don't want to burn through all our orbs like that. So just keep that in mind. The other thing Dante cannot do is he cannot hold the Million Stab by holding the button. If you hold, we're going to get Dante's next skill that we'll talk about, which is the sword waves he fires out. I'm going to go ahead and reset so I can refill the gauges here. So if we hold the red orb, Dante will charge and release 2 sword waves, up to 3. This has a charge level on it, just like Vergil's charge skills do. So the longer you hold, the higher the charge will be, the more sword waves will shoot out. If you charge to finality, as you can see, you will get an entire Devil Trigger and core passive gauge by doing this. So this is the way to fill your gauge from a distance if you need to snipe an enemy or whatnot, but the longer you hold it, the more it goes, and then you get a full gauge. Quite nice. If you do not have any red orbs to ping, you can still fire up to 3 orbs, or 3 sword waves. However, it's going to do notably less damage, and it will not build any of your core passive gauge whatsoever. This is just another way, basically, to build gauge up. It's going to be more efficient pretty much every single time to just do Stinger into Million Stab if you want to get to a full Devil Trigger gauge, but this is another option you have available if you just want to charge up. A good example of when you might want to use this is if you have just cleared out a wave and Dante comes on field and the next wave hasn't spawned in a war zone, then just go ahead and charging this up and taking the immediate damage in full gauges might be a good way to mitigate that downtime while you're waiting for a new enemy to spawn. Those are the main skills. There's another important one. Before we get into that, I want to talk about the air options that Dante has while using the Devil's Sword. So as we mentioned before, if you hold jump, you will get the rising upper with the Devil's Sword. Doesn't matter what equipment you're using, you're always going to get that. But if you start doing basic attack in midair, Dante has an aerial rave just like Vergil does. His can be done infinitely. You can stay here and do this as long as you want in the air if you so desire. This obviously isn't going to do any sort of worthwhile damage, and all it's going to do is very slowly build some signature energy and build up your white rose orbs. Slowly, I might add. But this is available if you want to stall out in the air for a little bit to either let an orb or two come back or to just waste some time until you decide what next part of your style combo you're about to go into. If you ping the red orb while in midair with Devil's Sword, we will get Helm Splitter. Just like the other skills, this will consume up to 3 white rose orbs to enhance the damage and build gauge for Dante, so it works identical to the other red orb skills he has. You won't be using this much except for styling. In terms of rotation stuff, this is not particularly useful just because we don't really want to take the time to go airborne just to fire off one attack when it's much, much more efficient to just mash 2 red orb pigs and build up our gauge that way. So that covers all the skills outside of Sin Devil Trigger mode except for one. Just like the Balrog and with Vergil, Dante has a hold basic attack while utilizing his Devil's Sword. Now, unlike Vergil's setups where like you could do the Mirage Blade Orb and then charge the Shockwave after by holding basic, this is completely separate from any of Dante's orb skills. You always have access to this skill. It's called Dance Macabre, and if you hold down the basic attack button, Dante will go into a flurry of hits, leading with a big swing and knocking the enemy airborne. This does not consume any white orbs, nor does it build up anything except some signature energy, unless, as you can see, you have Devil Gauge available. So if you have a full Devil Trigger gauge and a full Devil Arms gauge, Dance Macabre gets a notable buff. So I'm going to go ahead and reset here so we can kind of go through this piece by piece. So we'll bring Dante in. We're going to get a full gauge by doing one red ping into another red ping. So we have our full gauges here. If you are full on Devil Trigger and Devil Arms gauge, when you do Dance Macabre, it is going to consume all of the Devil Trigger gauge, and it is going to give you 400 judgment points. The Devil Trigger gauge can give you up to 400 judgment points by consuming it with the hold basic skills. The Devil Arms gauge will be consumed half at a time, and each half will grant you 100 judgment points. So if you have a full gauge of both, and you do Dance Macabre, it will consume all of it to build up a total of 600 judgment points. This is basically the start of Dante's fire rotation. We want to get this built up as quickly as possible because not only does it give us a bunch of judgment points to work with, it also gives us 2 notable things. One, as you can see, our signature is now online, which means we have access to Sin Devil Trigger. This gets us into that mode very, very efficiently. It's 2 red pings into a hold basic, boom, we can go into Devil Trigger. Awesome. The other notable thing is that when you do Dance Macabre with both gauges full, Dante is going to gain a buff called the Devil Sword Mark. Dante has 2 mark style buffs, the Devil Sword Mark and the Ignition Mark. The Devil Sword Mark will increase all of the damage of Dante's fire-based skills. So Dance Macabre with the Sword Mark will now do extra damage compared to its normal version, and then when Dante is in Sin Devil Trigger mode, all of his skills will now do extra fire damage because he has this Devil Mark available. We'll go over Sin Devil Trigger in its own section, just kind of showing you how it works in practice. But just note, once you perform Dance Macabre with both core passive gauges totally filled up, he gets this buff. The Devil Sword Mark is not indicated anywhere. So if I hold Dance Macabre, consume all the gauge, The Devil Sword mark buff is active. However, even if you go into the menus, you'll see there's no icon here to indicate it. There's nothing on the screen up on the bars indicating it. This is just a persistent buff that exists. I'm not sure why we don't have an icon for it. Usually we get some sort of indication for basically any buff, whether it's on our bars or somewhere on the core passive gauge. But in this case, it does not show. That said, the Devil Sword mark, as far as I can tell, is persistent. It will not go away unless you swap to the ignition mark by activating that buff. And it does not seem to go away if Dante goes off field. I can't 100% confirm that. So if anybody knows if his mark buffs stay persistent when he is off field, feel free to let me know down in the comments. If it goes away when he goes off field, let me know as well, because I'd like to update that with a pinned comment. I cannot find concrete information on whether or not his mark buffs persist once he obtains them. But as far as I can tell, once you have either of the mark buffs, they are permanent until you swap to the other one, or I guess until the battle is over or Dante dies. So that buff is very useful. It just buffs all your damage. You don't have to do anything special to do it. You will get there naturally by doing your rotation. So it's a nice thing to have, and it will be very notable for the ignition rotation because it will help increase the damage of all our ignition skills. But that goes over everything for the Devil Sword equipment. A little bit simpler than Vergil's Yamato, honestly. Not as many in and out combos or ways to chain into other moves. But if you're only caring about the meta chase aspect, all you really need to know about Devil Sword Dante is pinging 2 sets of red orbs into Dance Macabre will set you up for the basis of the fire rotation. Of course, I'll go into that when we get to that section. But that covers the Devil Sword. Let's go ahead and move on to the Balrog. Okay, so Balrog actually functions quite similar to Dante's Devil's Sword. Very similar set of attacks and very similar purpose for how we want to use it to maximize cashing out our core passive gauge and setting up rotations and all that good stuff. But let's go through piece by piece just as we did before. So the blue orb is a combo orb just like the red orb is for the Devil's Sword. If we do it once, Dante will dash in and throw a single punch, summoning the fire swords in the process. This does cover some distance. However, it does not cover nearly the distance that Stinger can. So if you need to gap close and do it quickly to chase down an enemy, you're going to want to go for Stinger as opposed to Balrog, because if you're way far away and you get locked on and you try and do this, it's pretty slow and it will not cover the same amount of distance. So just something to keep in mind there if you're using it as a gap closer. So that's the first half. If we do 2 red orbs back to back, this will do the same thing as pinging the 2 red orbs back to back. It will consume up to 3 white flower orbs if you have them available. So if you have 6 available, we're going to do a double hit combo that will build up the entirety of our gauges. So we do 1 and 2. Dante launches the enemy into the air, and you can see we have a full Devil Trigger gauge and a full Devil Arms energy gauge. So just like the Devil Sword, this is basically the single most efficient way to get into a full set of gauges. This is also going to be the route we use for ignition. So for the ignition rotation, learning this is going to be very important. It is very, very easy. It's just hit the orb twice. There's nothing fancy about this one. So, as for Dante's hold blue orb, if you hold the blue orb, Dante will go into a breakdance. This can be held indefinitely. It will continue to consume flower orbs if you have them available until you run out. However, you can just keep doing this by holding it down. Eventually, he will do the flip kick that launches the enemy. But if you continue holding the orb like I'm doing now, you'll see that Dante will do this basically infinitely. However, without any orbs, it will not build any gauge, it won't do much damage, and this is particularly just a style move. You basically don't need this for rotations, you don't need this for anything meta-wise. The only reason you're going to do the breakdance is to style on a fool. But just like the other skills, if it consumes orbs, it will build Devil Trigger and Devil Arms energy, and of course it will eventually build signature energy and all that good stuff as well. So just a fun style move to have there. After that, we have Dante's air options. So if we go ahead and get into the air, His basic attack in the air is just the dive kick. This is the only attack he has. He does not have a full aerial rave in the air with Balrog. This doesn't consume any orbs, so if you just want to get back to the ground and juggle the enemy, you can use the dive kick at your leisure by using basic attack while airborne. If you are in the air and ping the blue orb, you will get the air Tatsu, which looks really cool. I actually really like this move a lot. If you don't have white orbs, you won't get the swords, but if you have white orbs, you will see the swords come out along with the Tatsu. This can be spammed infinitely, just like the breakdance. This won't have any real meta or rotation application, but if you want to style on a fool by infinitely air Tatsuing them for, you know, eternity, by all means, go nuts. Nothing's going to stop you. So, probably one of my favorite moves Dante has in this particular moveset, even though it's not particularly useful for actual rotations in the metagame. I'm a fighting game player, man. You're never going to make me mad to see an air Tatsu thrown into the equation. So, but anyway, all right. So the last attack Dante has with the Balrog is going to work just like it did with the Devil Sword. We hold basic. Dante will summon a Fire Wheel Sword and then go into an uppercut. Just like Dance Macabre, the longer you hold this, the more it'll go into. This move is chargeable manually, but that comes with a caveat. So before I show you its main application, if I hold this and then release, Dante will do the uppercut quicker. You can hold it as long as you want, charge it to finality, or you can do a middle charge and get a slightly faster uppercut. So that is available. However, the main usage of this move is much like Dance Macabre. This is how we consume our Devil Trigger and Devil Energy Gauge to build judgment points. And most importantly, doing this skill with a full Devil Trigger gauge and full Devil Energy gauge will grant Dante the Ignition mark, which means all of his skills are going to do ignition damage in Sin Devil Trigger mode. As you can imagine, this is a key component of the rotation. But the basic way you're going to use this in most applications, if you're doing actual Warzone rotations and stuff, is we're going to do 2 blue orb pings to start the launch combo, then we'll hold basic, and we will let that animation play out. So we go all the way through. We see the Devil Trigger gauge is consumed, the Devil Energy or the Devil Arm Energy gauge is consumed, and we have our 600 judgment points. This works exactly like Dance Macabre. It will give the exact same amount of judgment points. The difference is now we have the Ignition mark buff as opposed to the Devil Sword mark buff. So we are set up to do ignition damage. One thing I do want to note about this move when you do it in conjunction with having full gauges is that it is no longer chargeable. If you hold basic with both gauges, the animation is guaranteed to play out. You cannot break out of it by casting ultimate or tapping other skills. So if I go ahead and go into this charge, you're going to see I'm trying to spam the Balrog. It does not switch. That animation is persistent. So there is no manual charge if you have the full gauges to convert into judgment points. This doesn't really matter to you unless you are using this specifically for styling or creating your own creative combos, because this is what you're going to want to do for his actual ignition rotation. So, one more time just showing you this works. But the nice thing is you can cancel into Sin Devil Trigger mid-air. After this goes off, this will be a key part of the rotation. But that is the basics of Dante's Balrog Orb. Pretty straightforward. Basically, you can just think of Devil Sword Dante is the fire damage equipment that you'll use to get into fire damage rotation options. The Balrog is ignition damage equipment to get into his ignition rotation. Pretty straightforward. They both have almost identical movesets, just with their own flair, with one being a gauntlet weapon, the other being an actual, whole-ass sword. So that covers the entirety of Balrog. So let's move on to Dante's most unique orb, which is the hat, aka Dr. Faust. Okay, so the last of Dante's main equipment orbs is the hat, Dr. Faust. This orb functions a lot closer to a traditional PGR skill orb, since it does not actually have its own set of basic attacks and other things. As mentioned in the basic section, anytime you tap this orb, this will cause Matrix and QTEs to proc if they are on cooldown, and Dante will call down the meteors equipping the hat. Unlike Balrog and Devil Sword, there are not near as many attacks available under Dr. Faust. Basically, it only has 2 aside from the tap. You can always tap whenever you want to get the meteor call without spending any resources. Tapping will not use any white rose orbs, doesn't expend any resources from your devil gauge or your devil arms energy. It's just a free orb you can tap to do damage. This is basically the main use of this weapon in actual rotations. When Dante leaves the field, this is a great thing to toss out Trigger Matrix and have some fire damage going on while you swap Dante out and switch to your next attacker. So that's its main purpose. As for what you can do beyond the base attack of just tapping the orb, just like the other two weapons, there is a hold option. So if we hold down the Dr. Faust orb, what will happen is Dante will start charging, and he will consume white rose orbs over and over again to build up both gauges and to increase the overall damage of the meteors that fall. So if I start holding, you'll see we'll start consuming white rose orbs. You can charge this all the way to finality. It will expend the gauges, call the meteors down, and you'll see we get some judgment points for our trouble. Now, this is a little bit different from the other ones because it can consume more white rose orbs. This can consume up to 12 white rose orbs if you charge it all the way. But the main difference is that you can still charge this without any white rose orbs, and you'll see it gave a full devil gauge, right? The devil energy arms gauge fills up. The difference is that when you charge Dr. Faust, no matter how much Devil Arms energy you have built up, when you release it, it's going to drain the Devil Energy Arms gauge. And if no flowers were used to charge the actual skill, if you don't consume any white rose orbs, you will build 0 judgment points, but the gauge will still drain. So, very important to note that this actually makes Dr. Faust not only the least use of the equipments, it's just out and out the least efficient if you are looking from the meta perspective, because it chews through orbs way quicker than doing the double orb combos with Balrog or with Devil Sword. And if you noticed, when you get the maximum on this, so if we bring Dante back in, and I go ahead and immediately charge Dr. Faust to get a full Devil Trigger gauge and energy gauge, when we let go, you'll see we use all our Devil Trigger, we use the full energy gauge, we only get 300 judgment points. Literally half of what we get from doing the double orb and to hold basic on either Balrog or the Devil's Sword. So this is basically just a style option. The only time you would do this is just to style on someone and call down the meteors to do some extra damage, call some juggles. That's basically its only purpose. You're never going to want to burn your white rose orbs by charging Dr. Faust for a long period of time. Those can be best used elsewhere in actual meta rotations. But if you want to call them down and keep the enemy juggled, have some meteors bounding on their head while you're throwing them all over the battlefield, by all means, go nuts, add it into your style rotation. It'll work great for that purpose. Last attack we have with Dr. Faust is when we are airborne. So if you are airborne and you tap the orb, Dante will throw out the hat, do some damage. This also will consume white rose orbs. Every time you tap the orb, it will consume some, build the gauge, and build Devil Trigger gauge. The nice thing is that tapping it while in midair and throwing the hat will not consume the Devil Energy gauge like charging it on the ground will. You can do this without white orbs as well, so if we go in the air and I just smash, you can call it back, and on the second callback, Dante will call a small fire projectile that will launch the enemy. So if you have no orbs to ping, it will do less damage, but you can always do the hat throw into the hat return, get the little projectile launch, and use that as another way to increase your style options and create new combo routes. But that is effectively the entirety of Dr. Faust. It is a very simple orb. Like I said, your main use is going to be after rotations, just tapping it, bringing on the meteors, and then swapping Dante out for your next attackers. So that'll be what you'll be doing in the actual rotations that matter. Otherwise, it's just another way to style and consume some orbs if you want, so play around with it in your combos. And obviously, I mean, throwing the hat's cool. It's really, really fun. Why would you not want to throw the hat? But anyway, that covers Dr. Faust. We've gone over all the main equipment, so let's go ahead and talk about Sin Devil Trigger. Alright, so let's talk about Dante's Sin Devil Trigger mode. Just like Vergil, once you build up enough ultimate energy, Dante will be able to transform into his Sin Devil Trigger. It operates a lot like Vergil's in terms of getting there, but once they are in their Devil Trigger mode, they actually act very, very differently from one another. And we'll go over all those differences and how Dante's works in practice. Before we get into the actual mode and going over the skills, how all this stuff works, I do want to note that unlike Vergil, Dante has a quote-unquote fast ultimate where he can use his Sin Devil Trigger ultimate finishers without actually doing the full transformation, going into the mode, doing attacks and stuff like that, and building up energy. How you do that is we're going to go ahead and build up enough to be able to transform. So I'm going to do the double red orb combo into Dance Macabre. Cool. We have enough signature energy. We're good to go. We can transform at our leisure now. Now, if you tap the button, you will do the normal transformation. Dante will transform into his Sin Devil trigger. He will gain new skills, attacks, and abilities, just like Vergil does in his. However, if we hold the ultimate button, Dante will instead just go straight into his ultimate finisher that he would do if you cast ultimate while in Devil Trigger mode. We do this by holding, so if we hold the ult button right now, you'll see Dante transforms, slams the ground, and does a quick explosion. This is the much weaker and toned down version of his ultimate, because if you ever do his ult finisher with less than 800 stacks, you get that basic ultimate. He slams the ground, the explosion happens, that's it. The ultimate's over. Very straightforward and basic. If you have 800 stacks or more of the judgment points, so I'm just going to go ahead and build up some of those real quick, and then we can do Balrog and then Dance Macabre. Okay, so we're at max stacks. We're at a full 1,000 now. Now, if I hold and do the ult finisher, we're going to get the full Final Judgment version of his ult finisher. This is notable to be able to do because, like I said, Vergil, you can't do this. You can't just hold his ultimate button while he's a human and get into Judgment Cut End. You have to go into Devil Trigger first. Even if you exit immediately out of it and then do his ultimate as a human, you still have to actually activate Devil Trigger to get to Judgment Cut End with Vergil. It doesn't work any other way. Dante is allowed to go ahead and just do his ult finisher by just going, hey, I'm going to hold the button. Cool, we're done. This is not going to be very useful for rotation practices. However, there are a couple common situations where it could be very useful to you. One, if you're at the end of a war zone run and you're about to clear a wave right before the timer ends, but you don't have enough time to go through the whole rotation of going into Sin Devil Trigger mode, using the skills, and then doing the ultimate that way, you can use this fast ultimate to try and wipe that final wave before the timer runs out, because getting one more wave off is always a notable boost to your war zone score. The more common application is going to be if you are using Dante as your Pain Cage nuker. If he is your best fire attacker, or if once we start getting ignition weak Pain Cage bosses, using that fast ultimate is probably going to be a great way to nuke down either the weaker bosses or the bosses at lower difficulty levels where you probably don't need to go through the entirety of Sin Devil Trigger to get the boss down. So the fast ultimate will be useful, but you're going to have to experiment where it's actually useful from a meta perspective. If you are just styling, feel free to use the fast ultimate whenever you want. Do note that if you use the one below 800 points, there is some notable lag on that animation recovery, so your combo is more or less good at end, and you're not going to be able to continue it from there if you're trying to do a big, long, fancy, stylish combo. So something to keep in mind there. But that is Dante's fast ultimate. Let's actually go through his regular transformation and what that entails. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and just use the Dance Macabre route. So if we tap, we will go into Sin Devil Trigger mode. So there are two transformation animations, one for on the ground and one in the air. The air animation, which I'll show in a bit, is much faster. However, both animations do trigger time stop. They still count as ultimates. So there's not necessarily a quicker way. Like, you're not going to lose timer efficiency for doing the ground transformation against the air transformation. It might be slightly slower, but depending on which damage type you're using, you're going to do one or the other, and I'll explain in a moment here. But before we get into all the skills and stuff Dante has in SDT mode, couple important things. One, Dante does not have a timer on his Devil Trigger mode. Unlike Vergil, there is nothing to force you back out of Devil Trigger mode if you don't want to leave the mode. Now, there are some caveats to this that I'll explain when we get to the skills, but there is no time limit on how long you can be in Devil form with Dante. You can do this as long as you want. The other important thing to note is that unlike the base orbs, which have a damage element tied to them, the Devil's Sword focuses on the fire damage, the Balrog focuses on the ignition damage. In Devil Trigger mode, your damage is going to be based off which of the two mark buffs you have. So if you have gotten into Ultimate by doing 2 red pings into Dance Macabre and you now have the Devil's Sword mark, all of these skills are going to do pure fire damage. They will not do any ignition damage. They will not build any ignition stacks. If you happen to have the ignition mark by doing the double blue orb ping into the charged uppercut, then all of your skills in Devil Trigger mode are going to do ignition damage instead and will build ignition stacks. This is why it's key to learn both weapon routes for getting into Devil Trigger mode, because you're going to use one for the fire rotation and the other for the ignition rotation. But just note that all of these skills will always do that type of damage depending on which mark you have. Now, before we get into the color orb skills, Dante does have a base attack string in Devil Trigger mode. It's very, very simple. You can do it as often as you want and repeat it. However, there are no super unique attacks out of this. You can't hold basic to do anything, and he doesn't have a specialized dodge attack or anything either. It's just a basic attack string. However, this is a little different from Vergil's. Dante does in fact build back white orbs by spamming his basic attack while in Devil Trigger mode. You won't use this for rotations because obviously this is still a very, very slow way to build orbs. However, if you're styling, this can give you a chance to build up some orbs, keep the enemy juggled, and then go into one of your other skills later on with some more orbs, available to you. Dante's jump button, since he is flying, becomes a projectile. You can spam this infinitely. It does not cost any resources or anything. However, this builds absolutely nothing. This will not build signature energy. It will not build orbs. It will not build any gauges. It is just I'm doing this to do it, and that's all it's going to do. The only notable thing it does is it will do fire damage, so it will trigger any fire shred or anything like that procs off of sets. So those are the two basic attacks you have available in Devil Trigger mode. How his orbs work is a little different. So there are the three main orbs. They're no longer directly tied to equipment because Dante is no longer wielding his devil arms. So you probably noticed when we went into Devil Trigger mode, we got a full devil energy gauge, devil arms energy gauge. I should note that the tooltip calls this the Sin Devil Trigger gauge while you are in Sin Devil Trigger mode. This is effectively exactly the same gauge as the core passive gauge when Dante is in human mode, but because he's not wielding his armaments anymore, they refer to it as Sin Devil Trigger gauge. For me, it's just confusing. I'm just going to call it Devil Arm Energy for sake of simplicity because it is literally doing the exact same thing. When you use the skills, some of this gauge gets consumed and gets converted into judgment points. It works exactly the same as it does in human form, just the skills and the amount being converted are different. So, for our first two orbs, the red orb and the blue orb. The red orb is Sin Devil Trigger Stinger, so these orbs can either be tapped or they can be held down. If you tap them, you will do one instance of the attack, you will burn 1/4 of the devil energy gauge, and you will gain 100 sin points for using it. So if I tap Stinger, Dante goes into the drill, you see we burn 1/4 of the gauge, we gained 100 judgment point stacks. Using these orbs will also proc Matrix if it is off cooldown. For the blue orb, if I tap it, Dante is going to fire out a bunch of projectiles, doing whatever damage type you are currently tied to for your mark buff. Yet again, it will consume 1/4 of the gauge and build 100 judgment points. Now, if you hold down either of these skills, Dante will do them continuously until the gauge is empty, converting them all into judgment points. And once you are out of Devil Energy Gauge, your orbs become dim. You can no longer use them. The only way to get these orbs back is to exit Devil Trigger mode by either casting your ultimate finisher or exiting manually. If you are doing styling videos or trying to show off cool combos and you want to be able to get back into human form ASAP, Dante does have that always available. Vergil, you had to swap the skill to enable this. Dante doesn't do that. This is just always available to him in his base skill. But if you tap the taunt button or click the core passive gauge, Dante will exit out of Devil Trigger form and immediately go back into human mode. So that is one way to get out of Devil Trigger mode. You'll see because we already had the ultimate energy built up, I can go ahead and hold and cast my main ultimate if I want, or I could tap and immediately go back into SDT mode. So we're going to get back into that real quick. This time I'll show you the ignition route. So if we do the double hit into the charge, this gets us enough energy, and then if we transform in the air, you see it's a much quicker animation, but obviously much shorter time stop because it doesn't last very long. But now, since we have gone in via the ignition route, we now have the ignition mark buff. All our skills are going to do ignition damage. So we've gone over these first two. You can hold these all the way through. So if I want to just hold Stinger for the entire duration and build up our judgment points, we can do it that way. If you want to tap them, you can. For rotation purposes, you're just going to be holding. You're just going to hold down the skill, convert your gauge so you can get to your ultimate ASAP. And we'll go over that in the rotation section. So I'm going to transfer out one more time here because we need to talk about the yellow orb. So if I tap, go into Sin Devil Trigger mode. So the yellow orb is unique in this mode. This one cannot be tapped or held. It is just going to use the entire gauge immediately upon using it. You can only use the yellow orb at max devil energy. If you are even 1/4 below, it gets dimmed out and can no longer be used. But if you tap the yellow orb, Dante will summon a black hole to do a bunch of damage and then cause an explosion and go from there. This is only a styling orb. This does the least damage by far. It also doesn't help build as many stacks as the other two skills do if you're going for the ignition route. So this is solely for styling purposes. You only use this if you're trying to create cool combos and do stuff like that. And again, you need the entire gauge to use it. As soon as you use either the red or blue orb, the yellow orb is immediately locked out. You don't have access to it anymore. So I'm going to go ahead, do our finisher. And that covers that. I also want to note that when you do the yellow orb, in the tooltip, it will tell you that you need 120 Devil Trigger to use the yellow orb. That is a typo. Devil Trigger does not play into his Sin Devil Trigger abilities. I think what they meant to do was type Sin Devil Trigger, because again, when you convert into the Sin Devil Trigger form, the game considers this gauge no longer the Devil Energy Arm gauge, but the Sin Devil Trigger Energy gauge. I think they just meant to type Sin Devil Trigger, and they accidentally left out the S. So it says you need Devil Trigger to use the yellow orb. That is not true. As long as you have a full Devil Energy gauge, you can use the yellow orb. So that goes into basically everything. That is all you can do in Sin Devil Trigger mode. You have seen the whole shebang and how it works. In general, how it's going to work from scratch is, I'll just show you real quick, because this is going to be the basis for the rotations, which we'll be going into soon. But we go in, we immediately build our gauge, we get into Sin Devil Trigger mode, and then you're going to use one of your two main orbs. Stinger is going to be the go-to for rotations for the main reason that it is a much quicker animation to play out than the blue orb is. If you just hold down Stinger, you're going to burn that gauge really quick, get it taken care of, and you're good to go. I'll show you in comparison how this one works. So if I hold down the blue gauge, you'll see this animation is notably slower to empty the gauge. That's the only reason we don't really do it. It doesn't serve any purpose because it's slower. Again, if you're just styling, use whichever one you want. It's totally fine. Also of note, if you are in ignition mode, if you have the ignition mark, casting the ultimate will ignite. It will cause the ignition effect to trigger. I'll go over the entirety of that effect in its own section here in a little bit when we get to that rotation. But just note that your ultimate is what actually activates the ignition elemental effect and procs it to actually start going. So that is all of Sin Devil Trigger. A lot simpler than Vergil's. Basically get in there, use an orb, use your ultimate. Cool. That is the gist for meta play. For non-meta play, you have the basic attack and the projectiles to spam to your heart's content. You can exit out of the mode by forcing it by using the taunt button, and then you can use any of the skills you want in correlation with each other, except for the yellow orb. That'll take your whole gauge. So with that covered, we have basically gotten the entire combat kit gone over now. I do want to wrap up the combat demonstration real quick and talk about Dante's Cubs, so let's go do that. Okay, so now we know how all of Dante's skills and orbs work, how getting in and out of Devil Trigger is accomplished, and all your various options for creating stylish and unique combos in both of those modes. The one last thing I want to talk about before we start getting into rotations and more meta min-maxing is Dante's Cub. So, as mentioned prior, unlike Vergil, Dante will have to own and equip his Cub to use its skills. He cannot just tap the Cub button while not equipped and get a baby version of a skill. So you do have to have acquired the Cub to do this. However, his Cub does still have some unique options. So, if you tap the Cub skill when you do not have the active skill charge, so you have yet to ping a total of 6 orbs and charge up the active skill, Dante will actually take the Cavalier and do a Stinger attack. This is notable for a few reasons. One, it builds some of the gauge, because what it does is it pings 3 of your white rose orbs, up to 3 if you have them available, and it will also fill your gauges, just like doing a normal orb would. Now, for meta rotations and efficiency stuff, this is never going to be ideal because it doesn't do nearly as much damage and you're not setting up your ignition mark and stuff like that, but it will build your gauge. So this is useful for doing things like setting up stylish combos where you need a little bit of extra gauge and devil trigger energy, stuff like that. So if you continue to tap the Cub skill, Dante will go into an entire combo. The first 2 hits will consume orbs. The rest of this does not. The rest of the combo will not build anything, though. It will not build signature energy. It won't build any gauge, but it won't use any of your white rose orbs. So this combo is available at all times. You can do this even if you don't have any white rose orbs available. It just will ping them if you do. Really only a concern if you're doing meta things. You can also do this infinitely. You can keep chaining the bite combo as much as you want. So the only thing to note is that once you have an active charge online, if you do have the skill fully active and you tap the button, it is going to do its active skill instead. So the bike will summon in, group up the enemies if you have the group option selected for the active skill. And then once you've expelled the active skill, you can go back to doing the Cavalier combo and using it to your heart's content. So this is why I mentioned that if you really care about styling with Dante, you're probably going to want to pick up the Cub, because having the Cavalier is obviously a super stylish and super unique way to continue combos and juggles, and I definitely recommend you play around with it while working on your combos and your big, long demonstrations to show how much you can style on a given boss. But that is it. That is the entirety of the combat kit. I feel like this was shorter than Vergil's. God, I hope it was. But nonetheless, I do feel that overall, Dante is a lot easier to wrap your mind around. He's a lot easier to keep track of, and more or less doesn't have quite near as many complicated ins and outs with his orbs and his general game flow. And I think that will especially show when we get into the rotations here. So let's go ahead, get ready, and we will start talking about how to do meta rotations with Dante. All right, so let's go over the fire damage rotation for Dante. This is pretty straightforward and very simple to pick up due to the fact that Dante has pretty long animations to get through his fire rotation. We're just going to utilize a single ult rotation for him, regardless of what rank you have him at. Dante's evolutions don't really change his rotations at all, which is quite nice because, 1, it means this guide gets to be shorter. 2, it means you don't have to learn multiple things if you slowly evolve him to higher ranks. So for the fire rotation, as mentioned prior, if you have a Lucia Pyro Oath that is similarly invested, she is going to be the better fire attacker option. She's just going to do more fire damage than Dante because, again, his kit is more tailored towards his elemental effect with ignition. But if your Pyro Oath is underinvested or you do not own her, then Dante can serve as a fine fire attacker for you in the fire team. So just keep that in mind as we go in, but this rotation is real simple. As always, I'm going to go through it step by step in the video, explain why we're doing what we're doing, and then I'll play it out in real time, put the annotations off the side so you can practice. So I'm going to start off, we'll bring Dante in. Stinger will happen, get us close to the enemy, and we're going to immediately ping the red orb twice. We're going to do the full Devil Sword combo to build up our gauge. So 1, 2. From here, we're just going to hold basic attack to immediately go into Dance Macabre. As soon as Dance Macabre triggers the tank QTE, go ahead and proc it. There's no reason to save this for now because we're not going to use our Da Vinci QTE till we get to our final ultimate. So you might as well go ahead and toggle Watanabe's proc right now, get the tank debuff going, and that'll just help speed up the damage. If you don't have Watanabe, whoever your fire tank is, go ahead and have them proc here because we'll be saving the Da Vinci QTE for later. But Dance Macabre plays out. As soon as that ends, we tap Ultimate, go into Devil Trigger mode, and from here, we're just going to immediately hold the red orb and use Stinger until our entire gauge is depleted. Once you start doing this, once you see about 1 tick off the gauge down here, go ahead and call your Da Vinci QTEs because you will finish up and start the ultimate with the time stop before the Da Vinci buff runs out. So this will just help do added damage for the held Stinger. So we do Stinger until we get 1,000 stacks on the judgment points. We go ahead and tap our ultimate to go into the full ultimate. And then from here, after the explosion, what you're going to want to do is tap the red orb so that Dante does Helmbreaker. This is just to attack on a tiny bit of damage, and it gets us to the ground faster because before we leave, we want to tap the Dr. Faust orb and throw the meteors down before leaving. As you can see, we have just a teeny tiny bit of amplifier buff left, so that means when we get this orb out, it's going to snapshot the damage on the amplifier buff, get a little bit of extra damage, and then we swap to our next attacker. That's it. That's the entire rotation. Do it once, swap Dante out, and then you'll repeat your entire fire rotation, depending on who you have better invested. For example, if you have a very well invested Watanabe, you may want to do Dante first, then Watanabe, like I'm showing you here. However, if your Watanabe is much less invested than your Dante, or you're using an older fire tank or an A-rank fire tank, then go ahead and swap them in first and use Dante after. If you're using a lower ranked tank, what I would honestly recommend is doing double ult rotations with Dante, just giving up the amplifier buff and just soloing between him and Vera. But if you have the entire team built, then you're going to do one rotation with Dante, one ult rotation with Watanabe, one ult rotation with Vera, and then just keep the train moving from there. So very, very straightforward, very simple to pick up. So let's go through it in real time, and I'll put up the annotations for you off to the side. So Dante fire rotation, here we go. Bring Dante in. 2 red pings, hold basic, call the tank QTE, ult 1. Hold red until the gauge is empty, call QTEs, ult 2. Tap red for the Helmbreaker, land, cast Dr. Faust, swap to your next attacker. There you go. That is the entire fire rotation. This is basically a simple example. On my testing, double ult rotations were notably less good in Warzone. I definitely dropped score quite a bit by doing the double ult rotation. But as always, I encourage you to experiment with these new characters, especially in this case, since most of the focus on learning Dante from meta perspectives is going to be for the ignition elemental effect and not his fire rotation. But definitely experiment around. And something to note, if you do not have his signature weapon or you're not running deadline timing as a resonance, I would plan on probably omitting the Dr. Faust at the end. That probably might run you out of orbs if you're doing it every single rotation, but you'll have to test. You might be able to get away with tacking it on, but it's just going to depend on how many orbs you have available when you bring Dante on the field. So experiment with that. Deadline timing might cause you to need to omit that last yellow ping at the end, but honestly, that's the only thing that would change based on your equipment and investment level. Otherwise, this should work with basically any setup with his signature weapon. If you are using the 5-star weapon, there's a good chance you might need to do some extra basic attacks. You'll have to explore around, see if this works with the 5-star weapon or not. But that is the fire rotation taken care of. Let's go ahead and do the ignition guide. Okay, so let's talk about the ignition effect and how we're going to utilize it with our new ignition team now that we have Dante to actually make this team feel viable and usable in ignition content. So, just like the other elemental effects in the game, the name of the game is using specific skills and abilities to build up stacks that you will eventually convert into an active effect that we put on the enemy and use that to do our elemental effect damage. How ignition works is just like anything else, we can build stacks. So for Dante's, we've mentioned all his ignition damage is tied to the Balrog. So if we do our basic combo and then do the hold basic attack afterwards, you'll see we now have 4 stacks of combustible built up. Basically how this works is different skills that give the combustible debuff here build up a set number of combustion points. And for every 250 combustion points you build, you get a single stack of the combustible debuff. This stack marker can go all the way to 20 at max. So ideally what we want to do is build up enough stacks to have this at 20 and then use one of our abilities that procs the combustible effect, makes it ignite, hence ignition, and then the ignition elemental effect takes place. Now, the nice thing about ignition is that it's much more straightforward in my opinion and a lot simple to pick up and maintain than something like glaciation with its pretty tight timing window, plasma blade with its obviously tight timing window if you're doing the 5 5 ultimate rotation. And then Ultima Slash, of course, is a lot more finicky with the way the stacks are built up. Both Vergil and Han Ying have pretty complicated rotations to maintain the Ultima Slash buff where you want it. Combustion is much more set it and forget it, because once we trigger the combustible buff and it becomes ignition, all that's going to happen is that the enemy is going to get a debuff that puts a damage over time effect on them. And how it works is for 10 seconds, every single second, the enemy will take a tick of that damage over time, and that damage will be equal to 30% of the total ignition stacks when the element took effect. So unlike Glaciation or Plasma Blade, where we have a finite window that we have to dump our burst damage so it all gets improved, that's not involved with Ignition. Ignition is just building up the stacks, igniting them, and having a constant damage over time debuff that adds to our own ignition damage that we're doing via the rotations. So there is no like, oh, the ignition is active, so now my ignition ultimate is going to do X% more damage. No, not at all. Your ignition ultimate is going to do the same ignition damage it would always do, but that debuff is constantly ticking and it adds up very quickly. It adds a boatload of damage when it is active. So the basic idea is build up to max stacks if you can. Dante is far better at building to max stacks than Nanami is, but that is fine. They still both do a boatload of ignition damage and can ultimate regularly, so we get a lot of time stop. But you get built up, activate the effect, and then just continue your rotation. It's very, very simple. So in Dante's case, if we've gone ahead, we've got our 600 judgment points, we have ultimate online, so I'm going to go ahead and go back up at the air, activate ultimate. From here, we just need to hold Devil Stinger in Devil Trigger mode. That gets us to 20 stacks, and then Dante's ultimate is what triggers the ignition debuff. So now once the time stop ends, you can see this slowly building down, and you will see our enemy is taking static damage over time from the ignition debuff. Basically, we just keep repeating this over and over again, keep the DOT going as often as we can throughout the fight with as many stacks as possible, and we're just going to rotate between Dante and Nana Knight, and that's it. It's very, very straightforward. I think this is far and away the easiest elemental effect, not only to learn, but to do in practice. These rotations are not very executionally demanding. They're pretty straightforward, and depending on where you have your Nana Knight invested, they work at all ranks. There is one minor note we'll have to talk about for Nanami's part of the rotation, but other than that, this works at every single rank no matter what you're doing. So that is the general idea of how Ignition works. So I'm going to go get the rotation queued up, and we'll go through it, and I'll teach you how that works and why we're doing what we're doing. All right, so let's go through the actual ignition rotation for our new ignition team. I think this is far and away the easiest elemental rotation we have. This one is not high demand on the execution. It doesn't have ultra tight windows you have to constantly hit to maximize your damage. As long as you're doing everything in reasonable rhythm and keeping up with your muscle memory, this rotation is very, very easy to keep up with. So we are going to be utilizing a double ult rotation for Dante and a triple ult rotation for Nanami. They will be the only two seeing the field if you are doing the rotation correctly. We will never need Vera to come back on field. If you get slightly off sync, it is fine to bring Vera on field and just spam a couple orbs real quick, maybe go into her first ult depending on how off sync you are. But ideally, once you start with our two main ignition damage dealers, Vera is just here to give team buffs and to buff fire damage, since if you're in an ignition war zone, you're going to get increased fire damage just at a much lower rate than the ignition damage increase. And then, of course, we want the amplifier buff for swapping our characters back and forth. So I'll go through the whole rotation piece by piece, explain why we're doing what we're doing, and then we'll do the real time with the annotations. You all know how my guides work by now. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to bring in Dante. We are going to immediately swap to Balrog, so you can think of this as 3 blue pings. 1 to equip the Balrog, and then 2 to perform the 2-hit combo and fill up our gauge. So 1, 2, our gauge is now full. As soon as you see the core passive gauge completely full, you can go ahead and start charging basic. So we hold basic attack, let the entire uppercut play out. From here, we're going to ultimate just like we would in the fire rotation, but now we're set up for ignition instead. So we cast ultimate, and we immediately go into holding red for the Devil Stinger. So we're going to hold the entirety of this, call your QTEs when Matrix procs, and once this ends, we go into our ultimate. which triggers the ignition debuff at 20 stacks, which is exactly what we want. So this is the first ultimate for Dante. We're going to do this exact same thing again for a second rotation, but there's a little bit of a wiggle here. So after your first ultimate ends, what we're going to do is we're going to do a single red ping. Remember, your Devil Sword would be equipped automatically because that's what happens when you do your Sin Devil Trigger ultimate. But we're going to do one red ping to do Helm Splitter to land quicker and get on the ground. And in the process, that's also going to build half of our core passive gauge. From there, we land, we hit blue ping once to equip the Balrog. We hit it a second time to do the first punch of the combo, which will fill the rest of our core passive gauge. And then we can immediately go back into hold basic. So Helm Splitter, Balrog punch, charge basic. As soon as you're up in the air and the uppercut animation ends, switch to switch to Devil Trigger form again. Hold red for Stinger. Exhaust the entire Stinger, get to 1,000 judgment points, cast ult, call your QTEs. And from here, we don't need to spam a red orb again. We can just immediately swap out because Dante is done. We don't need him to land and start doing things. We are going to swap to Nanonite. So Nanami comes in. Nanami's ignition rotation is unbelievably simple. Probably one of the easiest we're ever going to get. Probably right up there with Vera's Dark Flow rotation. But Nanami is very, very simple to get her ignition going. So how this is going to work, we need half of the core passive gauge to start Nanami's ignition rotation. So to get that, if you have not watched my Nanonite guide or you're not familiar with Nanonite and you're watching this because you just picked her up and now you want to learn the ignition team, how Nanami works is she has combo orbs. So the first time you tap an orb, it will highlight and start one of her attacks. If you tap it again, it will use 3 pings off of the orb and then do a follow-up that builds part of her core passive gauge. If you do a full 3 ping, it fills up half. We only need half to get started, so just find whichever orb has 3 pings available. Sometimes they're not split in a way that's ideal. You might have one that only has 2 to start. It is a little bit of RNG, but deadline timing and stuff obviously eliminate that if you want to put it on. It's not necessary, but just something to keep in mind. But you're going to go ahead and double ping either red or blue, whichever one has enough numbers to get you a 3 ping out of it. That gets us half a core passive gauge, and from here, normally, if we were doing our lightning rotation, we would tap the yellow orb with a full core passive gauge and go into her big, winding, heavy swings with the switch axe. For ignition, all we need to do is hold yellow. So as soon as you have half a core passive, start holding yellow. This will do ignition damage. An explosion will trigger and Nanami will leap backwards. This will bring your ult online. As soon as she lands, you can cast ult. And if you're doing this correctly, right as you cast this ultimate, the combustion buff will be gone. We will be back to 0 stacks with no ignition effect active. So we do our first ult, call QTEs. And now this is the only point in the entire rotation where evolution rank matters. If your Nanami is triple S or above, like mine is, you will come out of the first ultimate with a full core passive gauge. This means you can immediately go back to holding yellow. You do not need to ping any orbs. If your Nanami is below triple S, what you will need to do is use your matrix ping on one orb, double ping it to get half the core passive gauge, then use another double ping of the same color to fill the core passive gauge to full. Then you start holding yellow to go to the next step. That is the only difference. I'll put in the annotations what you do if you're double S, but basically you're just going to do 2 double pings of either red or blue, then hold yellow. If you're triple S, you just immediately start holding yellow orb here. So we do that. Use the first half of the gauge, Nanami swap sides, second half of the gauge. She will do the spring away again, and at this point, we should have exactly 20 combustible stacks yet again, and ultimate will be online. So we ult. QTEs won't be back up quite yet if you're doing this as fast as you can. And now our ignition debuff is active once again. Now, Dante isn't quite back up yet, so we're going to do one more short ultimate rotation for Nanami. Same thing as the first one. We just need half a core passive gauge, so double ping either red or blue. It does not matter which one. And then hold yellow. Get your last ult. Call your QTEs. And then Dante will swap in. do the same exact rotation. That's it. Those are the only rotations you have to learn for either character. They do the same thing for the entirety of the rest of the Warzone run. There is no deviation. So pretty straightforward. I promise this one's not going to take you much time to pick up. Again, if your non-enemies below triple S, you will have to do 2 extra double pings in the middle of the rotation to make hers work, but it will still work just fine. You will just be ever so slightly slower than if you had a triple S non-enemy. So that's the rotation in whole with everything broken down. So let's do it in real time, go through everything, and I will put the annotations off to the side so you can practice. So ignition team rotation. Swap Dante in, double blue, hold basic, ultimate. Hold red, call your QTEs, ultimate 1, or ultimate 2 technically. After this, we're going to ping the red orb for Helmbreaker, ping blue twice for the punch, hold basic. Ultimate again, hold red, ultimate at 1,000 judgment stacks, call your QTEs, swap to Nana Knight as soon as the ultimate ends. Double ping an orb, hold yellow. Ultimate, call your QTEs. If you are below triple S, 2 double pings. If not, hold yellow. Then get to hold yellow. First half gone. Second half gone. Ultimate. This will activate the combustible debuff again and trigger ignition. Build up half a core passive gauge with a double tap on an orb. Hold yellow. Ultimate one more time. Call your QTEs. Swap back to Dante. Repeat Dante's rotation. There you go. The entire ignition team rotation right there, and the entire ignition guide stuffed in another guide yet again. If you guys would like me to just record these segments solo and actually repost them as their own guides, let me know. I'm happy to do that. I just don't want to do it right away because I feel like then I'm just trying to view farm, and obviously that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to teach you all how to play the teams. But if you would prefer to have a separate video that is just the Ultima Slash and just the ignition guides, let me know, and I can just record these from my previous recordings and upload them as their own videos if that would be helpful. But that is it. That is the entirety of how to play Dante, all his rotations, all of his abilities, how to style, how to play min-maxi for the meta. It's all right there, ready to go. And I think this was shorter than Vergil. Please, God, tell me it was shorter than Vergil. I'm so tired. But anyway, let's go wrap this guide up. All right, so that is going to be a wrap on Dante's guide. I think Dante's notably easier to wrap your head around and pick up and play with, not having as many branching attack routes and only having 2 dedicated weapons as opposed to the 3 that Vergil uses. I think aids in that a lot. It makes it a lot easier to kind of figure out all your options and how to chain the different attacks Dante have into one another. But being a little bit more simple doesn't make him any less fun to play or any lacking in the ability to do very flashy and stylish combos, just as Devil May Cry characters were intended to. So I'm excited to see what kind of crazy combo routes people come up with, the creative ways they're going to utilize some of the more nuanced mechanics like his cub, using the bike and all that good stuff. I'm sure there's got to be some cool juggles with jumping up and using the rose into something. So definitely excited to see what this community comes up with, because the fighting game player in me is never going to be sad about watching sick combos get developed from scratch. So as always, if you have any questions, if something didn't make sense, or if I missed a move or an ability, omitted something, please let me know. There were a couple moves in Vergil's guide that I definitely missed, and it just goes to show you that even with as much research and time as I put into these guides, apparently a nearly 2-hour guide couldn't contain all the little idiosyncrasies and deep options these 2 characters have. So if I missed something, please let me know. I'll put a pinned comment down to try and catch that, but I think I got everything this time, but I don't know, man. There could be a secret thing with the taunt I missed. I tried every route, but it doesn't mean I found them all. This is the joy of being a single-person guide maker. It's very easy to just miss something if you're not paying attention. And even when you are paying attention, when you're making guides this long and you're as tired as I am, it happens. So I apologize if I missed anything. I apologize for the stuff I missed on the Vergil guide. Thank you for pointing that out. I do appreciate it. I always like having updates and info in the comments for anything I might have made a mistake on or that I have missed, because I'm not perfect. Far from it. I make mistakes in guides. I sometimes misread or misunderstand certain things. So that's what the comments are for. But Anyway, this also kind of marks a big moment for me because now with these two massive guides done, I can finally feel like I'm caught back up after Evo and the event crunch and the crunch to try and get Devil May Cry stuff out as close to the release of the patch as possible. Just want to say again, thank you to all of you for being so patient with me. I know the video uploads in this channel have been a lot slower, a lot more sporadic with Evo and everything, but now that's out of the way. We should be back on a normal schedule. I also know it took a lot longer than normal to get the guides out. Ideally, I want the character guides out before the patch drops, but between Evo going on and Global not getting a test server to play with, there was no way. There was just absolutely no way. And I think in a weird twist of fate, it probably actually was for the better because it just allowed me to go, you know what? You're not getting this out on launch. Take your time. Make sure these guides are good. Make sure they count. Try to get everything as close to right as you can because, again, it's the Devil May Cry patch. So many of you new players are here because this patch exists, because Dante and Vergil exist. And that's why I've gone so wide on these guides, actually breaking down every little tiny move these characters have, because I know you guys want to know how this works. And I think more importantly for you new players, if you can grasp what I'm teaching you about these two characters, if you can understand what I'm telling you and understand how the kits work and why they do the things they do, you're going to be able to understand almost any PGR character currently in existence, and probably a good number of them that are going to come out for quite some time. So thank you again for hanging out. Thank you to all of you new players who stick around and putting PGR more in the limelight. The bigger this community gets, the more spotlight the game gets, the happier I'll be. I love this game to death. I want more people to love this game and to enjoy it, and I'm sure Devil May Cry is aiding in that a great deal. But as I said, we're mostly set going forward. These two massive projects are done. I'm done with Evo. And now I can just kind of make stuff. I can make some video ideas I've had to put off for a while, and I can talk about some general PGR stuff. We, of course, have the end of the global sync probably coming on the next patch. If I'm guessing right, this next patch will be our final global sync patch, and that's going to be a real interesting world to live in. It'll be the first time we're all getting stuff at the same time. So look forward to stuff on that. But right now, I'm going to go actually play Punishing Gray Raven. Like, I'm going to go play the collab story and enjoy the game at a normal pace for probably the first time this year. The global sync has made things complicated. Can you tell? Anyway, appreciate you all. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to do the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe. It's always appreciated. It's never necessary around here. And until the next one, y'all take care and be good. And I'll see you then. Peace.